Ancient Chinese legends tell the story of heroic figures who invented agriculture, domestic animals, taught people to marry and live in families, created music, introduced the calendar, and instructed people in the arts and crafts. These heroes are known as the three sage kings, Yao, Shun, and Yu. Yu was the most popular, creating a canal leading to the ocean, which would prevent the Yellow River from overflowing and damaging the countryside. Human beings appeared in East Asia around 400,000 years ago. They relied on stone tools and hunting and gathering economy. However, due to East Asia's population being so big, they were encouraged to experiment with agriculture, which would lead to the domestication of rice. This would lead to rice being a main source of food in Eastern Asia.
The Yellow River is the third largest river in Asia, rising in the mountains bordering the plateau of Tibet and courses 4,700 kilometers before emptying into the Yellow Sea, and the river contains loess soil, meaning extremely fine-like soil. The river periodically releases floods, devastating fields and villages, causing it to earn the name of China's Sorrow. The Shang dynasty is the successor of the Xia dynasty, and it lasted from 1766 to 1122 BC. Technology helped the rise of Shang dynasty as elites would monopolize off bronze technology. They were known for making axes, spears, knives, arrowheads, and fittings for horse-drawn chariots. Shang dynasty had networks of towns with local rulers of towns recognizing Shang kings, and approximately 1,000 or more towns were ruled in the Shang rule. Zhao were people who fought Shang forces in the east and nomadic raiders from the steppes in the west, but eventually the Zhao allied with the Shang and won recognition as the kings of the western region. Shang dynasty eventually fell, and Shang and Zhao collided in the late 12th century BC, and according to Zhao accounts, the last king of the Shang dynasty was inefficient, and his government was toppled by Zhao forces in 1122 BC. The Zhao government believed in the mandate of heaven, which is a belief that heavenly powers chose who became a ruler, and it was his duty to rule honorably. The Zhao dynasty was so big that they needed subordinates that would owe allegiance, taxes, and tributes, and in return, they would be able to rule. 771 BC, China was invaded by nomads, and subordinates refused to help, and by 256 BC, Zhao dynasty ended.
So, Chinese social order. At first, ruling elites had a large consumption of bronze, and already during the Xia dynasty, and also during the Shang and early Zhou dynasty, royal families and allied noble families occupied the most honored positions in Chinese society. There were also manuals of etiquette and administrative and military offices in these ruling elites. And there were also hereditary aristocrats with extensive landholdings. So, peasants. Peasants during this time period were basically the majority of the population. These peasants, there were landless peasants that had provided labor for both emperors and empresses. These peasants also owned no land, but they provided agricultural, military, and labor services for their lords in exchange for plots of cultivate, security, and a portion of the harvest. They lived in some of them lived in small subterranean houses, excavated to a depth of about 1 meter, so like basically 3 feet, and they're protected from the elements that thatched walls and roofs. Women's work. Women's duties included mostly indoor activities such as winemaking, weaving, cultivation of silkworms, etc., whereas men mostly spent their time outside doing work in the fields such as hunting, fishing, and other things. Veneration of ancestors. So it was a practice with roots of Neolithical times, and it was basically people believing in their ancestors' presence and their continuing influence on them. So these people did properly respect their ancestors and their descendants and their spirits' needs. So survivors buried tools, weapons, jewelry, and other material goods along with their dead. Um, so oracle bones. Oracle bones were the principal instruments used by fortune tellers in ancient China. In other early societies, specialists forecast the future by examining the entrails of sacrificed animals, um, like finding the meaning of omens or celestial events. But in China, diviners use specialized prepared broad bones, such as the shoulder blades of sheep or turtle shells. So, early Chinese writing, there were more than 2,000 characters identified on oracle bones. Modern Chinese writing is a direct descendant of Shang writing. Thought and literature. So, literature had many kinds of books. Examples would be the Book of Change, which is a manual of diviners, Book of History, which is the history of the Zhou, Book of Rites, which is the rule of etiquette and rituals for aristocrats, Book of Songs, which is a collection of vessels. Most notable work of is this is the most notable work of these books. However, most of these Zhou writings have been perished. So, nomadic peoples. Nomadic peoples did little farming since the arid steppe did not reward efforts of cultivation. Instead, the nomads concentrated on herding their animals, driving them to regions where they could find food and water. Exchange of products between nomads and Chinese farmers occurred. Nomads frequently invaded rich agricultural societies. Nomads didn't imitate Chinese ways, and then nomads relied on grains and manufactured goods of the Chinese. So the state of Chu, it challenged the Zhou for supremacy, and it adopted Chinese political and social traditions and writing. Um, Agricultural surpluses and growing populations led to the emerging of cities, states, and complex societies in the Yangtze as well as the Yellow River Valley. They also built societies closely resembling those of the Yellow River Valley, although only the northern portions of the Yangtze River Valley fell under the authority of the Shang and Zhou states.
In 99 BCE, Chinese imperial officials sentenced Sima Qian to punishment by castration. Sima Qian had been working on a project that upset the emperor due to him publicly expressing his opinion, which contradicted the rulers. Most Chinese men would take their own lives, knowing they're going to get castrated, but Sima felt that his work was not over yet. He would later publish 130 chapters of his work, which contained details of early imperial China. Political and social thoughts prepared the way of the unification of China under the Qin and Han dynasties. Confucians, Daoists, legalists, and others formed schools and thoughts that worked to bring political stability to China during the chaotic years of the late Zhou dynasty and period of warring states. Rulers of the Qin and Han dynasty adopted legalist principles and imposed central imperial rule on all of China. They imposed a common written language throughout China and established an educational system based on the Confucian thoughts and values. This would last for over 450 years of a strong centralized imperial rule, but due to the differences between the small class of extremely wealthy landowners and the lower class, these divisions would eventually lead to civil disorder.
The Qing, who were located in West China, adopted legalist policies. Their encouragement of agriculture resulted in them having a strong economy. Additionally, they organized a powerful army equipped with iron weapons. With this army, they conquered other parts of China and unified it by 221 BCE. The Qing's first emperor was Qing Shi Huangdi, who immediately established centralized imperial rule. He also made many projects to extend the Great Wall and killed those who opposed him, killing 460 scholars who criticized his views. He also burned all previous books in China aside from those with utilitarian value. The Qing also standardized many laws, currencies, weights, and measures. However, the Qing would soon collapse, as massive public works made many residents turn against their empire, and a wave of rebels would eventually overwhelm the Qing court by 207 BCE. The rebels would end the short-lived dynasty, but yet it still has made its mark on Chinese history. The collapse of the Qing would lead to the rule of the Han, who started ruling in 206 BCE when Liu Bang restored order. The Han had many policies to help sustain rule for as long as possible. They sought to find a middle ground between Zhou decentralization and Qing over-centralization, and their martial emperor Han Wudi emphasized centralization and expansion. The Han also adopted legalist policies similar to the Qing. However, aside from these policies, the Han also built an enormous bureaucracy to rule their empire, continued building roads and canals, levied taxes on agriculture, trade, and craft industries, and made imperial monopolies on iron and salt production. They also made a Confucian educational system for training bureaucrats. The Han also extended beyond China, invading and colonizing both northern Vietnam and Korea, allowing them to enjoy uncontested unity in East and Central Asia. The Han had a patriarchal social structure, subordinating women and making children obey their parents. Additionally, most of the population were cultivators, iron workers, textile producers, and paper producers. This increase in production set the way for large population growth, growing from 20 million in 220 BCE to 60 million in 9 CE. However, economic and social difficulties would soon rise, as raising taxes and land confiscation discouraged investment and caused social tension between the poor and rich. The social emperor Wang Mang soon came in to rule for the Han, ruling from 9 CE to 23 CE. However, he was overthrown by revolts, beginning the Han's decline. The later Han would fall victim to the Yellow Turban Uprising due to problems of land distribution, paralyzing their central government, dissolving the Han, and dividing China into regional kingdoms.
In 632 CE, Prophet Muhammad visited his native city Mecca from his home in Medina. Due to this travel, Muslims have sought to emulate this by traveling in pilgrimage to Mecca called the Hajj. The Hajj brings hundreds of thousands of Muslims from all over the world. They travel in all sorts of ways from land to sea to air. The Hajj happens in the last month of the Islamic calendar. The Hajj is very useful to the economy and encourages the government to maintain roads, wells, and places for the travelers to stay. By the 8th century, the realm of Islam stood alongside the Byzantine Empire as a political and economic anchor of the post-classical world. Islamic society originally reflected the nomadic and mercantile Arabian society from which Islam arose. Yet over time, Islam drew deep inspiration from other societies such as Persian, Greeks, and Indian.
In 629 CE, Mohammedan authorities participated in an annual pilgrimage to Kaaba, and in 630 attacked and conquered the city of Mecca, imposing Allah on the government. They destroyed pagan shrines and made them sacred places for Muslims to pray. In 632, Muhammad led the first Islamic pilgrimage to Kaaba, starting the Hajj, and later brought Arabia under control. The 5 pillars were used for that Islamic faith. 1. Muslims must acknowledge Allah as the only God. 2. They must pray to Allah daily facing Mecca. 3. They fast during daylight of Ramadan. 4. They contribute alms to relieve the weak and poor. And 5. Those able must take at least one pilgrimage to Mecca. Jihad is a type of struggle or obligation for Muslims to fight against non-believers. Shana is the Islamic law made by jurists and legal scholars based on the Quran to offer guidance like family life, marriage, inheritance, slavery, and crime. Allama Qadis worked in court to promote Islamic views and formal educational systems. Madrasas developed, and they were students with advanced education of Islam, theology, and law. Sufis were mystic missionaries that deepened their spiritual awareness of Allah. Al-Ghazali, from 1058 to 1111, argued human reasons were too frail to understand the nature of Allah, and they're unable to explain the world mysteries. Sufi missionaries attracted many converts because they expressed different ways someone can revere Allah. The symbol of Islamic unity was the Kaaba at Mecca, attracting Muslims from the Islamic world. The Hajj was a pilgrimage to Mecca to enhance the cultural unity of their realm. The Silk Road revived due to military and administrative use by the Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties. Camel caravans became popular, and caravanaries were in Islamic cities, like an inn for travelers and merchants. Arabs and Persian mariners borrowed the compass from the Chinese. Latin sails from Southeast Asian and Indian mariners. the astrolabe from the Hellenistic mariners, which calculated latitudes. Banks stimulated the Islam economy. Letters of credit or sak were like bank checks. The organization of trade. Entrepreneurs pulled for resources and group investment, improved organizations, and allowed further trade. People in Al-Andalus were Umayyads who refused to recognize themselves with Abbasid caliphs or the dynasty. Products from Al-Andalus allowed Cordoba's economy to grow. Abu al-Abbas was a descendant of Muhammad's uncle. He led a rebellion allied with Shias and non-Arab Muslims and defeated the Umayyad in 750. He founded and ruled the Abbasid dynasty, but it was later taken over by Mongols in 1258 CE. They ruled the dynasty with Persian techniques. Officials learned from ulama, people with religious knowledge, and qudis, which are judges. They ruled locally. From 786 to 809, Caliph Harun al-Rashid, the Abbasid authority, lost reliable tax revenue, and at the time Baghdad was at its highest point. The struggle for succession between Harun's sons led to the civil war. Governors built their own power bases and uprisings, and peasant rebellions weakened the state. In 945, a Persian noble family seized control of Baghdad, but fell to Seljuk Turks.
Muhammad's migration to Medina. Muhammad's rising popularity did not sit well with the ruling elites of Mecca, who perceived his values as a threat to the way of life. Muhammad's monotheistic values denounced the greed and idolatry, both important to the ruling elites. Facing fierce persecution, Muhammad's followers were forced to flee to Abyssinia, while Muhammad himself remained in Mecca until moving to Yathrib, later Medina. This migration became known as the Hijra, or migration. Muslims were part of what Muhammad called the Ummah, a faithful Muslim community which fought with enemies, dealt with economic issues within the community, provided relief for the poor and orphan, and more. As his religion continued to rise, Muhammad claimed himself as the final prophet before the arrival of Allah. While showing respect to Christianity and Judaism, Muhammad believed that Islam had the most complete revelation of Allah. Shortly after Muhammad's death, the Ummah was divided on how to select a new leader, and Islam also benefited from a series of successful military expansions beyond Arabia. Early Caliphs and Umayyad dynasty. Caliphs, or deputies, such as Abu Bakr, led the Ummah as lieutenants for Muhammad after his death. These caliphs sparked Islamic efforts of conquest and helped expand the reach of the religion. Military conquest was possible in part by the weakened state of more powerful empires due to previous conflicts, with the takeover of Syria, Palestine, most of Mesopotamia, Egypt, Persia, and many more Middle Eastern nations during the 7th and 8th centuries. By the mid-8th century, the Ummah controlled territory from India and the Central Asian steppes to the northwest African and Iberian lands. During this expansion, disputes within the Ummah on who should rule produced factions and parties, such as the Shia sect and the much larger Sunni majority. The Shia believed that caliphs should be of Muhammad's blood, something that the Sunnis did not enforce. This led to serious tensions and often conflict between the two. From 661 to 750, the Umayyad dynasty provided temporary relief to the problem of succession. A Meccan merchant clan, the Umayyad showed favoritism to the Arabs and Arab military leaders and levied a heavy tax called the jizya on those who chose not to convert to Islam. This resulted in deep resentment among non-Arabs towards the Umayyad dynasty. Starting in the early 8th century, the dynasty began its decline due to the relaxed attitude towards Islam, continued resentment by the Shia, the discontent of conquered peoples, and the disillusionment of Muslim Arab military leaders. New crops, agricultural experimentation, and urban growth. Commerce throughout the Dar-e-Islam helped serve as a great economic stimulus, primarily in the form of new crops and agricultural techniques. Crops such as sugarcane, rice, wheat, spinach, oranges, lemons, coconuts, watermelons, cotton, and many more were received from Persia, Southwest Asia, Arabia, Egypt, North Africa, and other places. New food crops lead to much higher food supplies and a greater variety of nutrients, increasing the quality of life in the Dar-Islam. New and experimental agricultural techniques, including irrigation and crop rotation, contributed to a more productive agricultural economy as well. This thriving economy allowed for the growth of many new cities that became important centers of industrial production. These include Isfahan, Basra, Damascus, and more, each with hundreds of thousands of people. Some industries included textiles, pottery, glassware, and paper, which allowed for the storing of administrative and commercial records thanks to the knowledge from captured Chinese. Changing the status of women. While Arabian women enjoyed rights not found anywhere else, such as the right to divorce, the Quran enhanced the security of other women in Arabian society. Women were portrayed as honorable individuals equal to man before Allah, not property. However, male dominance was still enforced. Only male polygamy was permitted, while the sexual lives of women were controlled by the males of their family. Another sign of female inferiority enforced in the Dar Islam was the practice of veiling upper-class women adopted from Eastern Mediterranean lands. Unfortunately, as time went on, later interpretations of the Quran only further strengthened male dominance in the Dar Islam. Islam and the cultural traditions of Persia, India, and Greece. Constant interactions and encounters brought lots of exposure to foreign cultures and values. The traditions of Persia, India, and Greece all had important influences on Islam. Persian administrative techniques borrowed from the Sassanid Empire were the basis of the imperial structures of the Umayyad and Abbasid empires. Persian literature was also apparent in Islam in the forms of the Rubaiyat and the Thousand and One Nights, to name a few. On the other hand, Indian mathematical traditions were adopted into the Muslim culture. India's Hindi numerals, later called Arabic numerals, allowed for advanced mathematics and simplified bookkeeping. Advanced math also allowed for precise astronomical calculations, and Muslims adopted Indian medicine for their own purposes. One last major source of inspiration for the Dar Islam were the Greeks, with their classical works on philosophy, science, and medical writings. Plato and Aristotle were especially popular, but not without resistance, such as Sufi al-Ghazali, who preferred Allah's revelation over human reasoning. Ibn Rushd, Qadi of Seville and Cordoba, derived inspiration from Aristotle when helping to shape Islamic philosophy and influencing the development of scholasticism. Later, Greek philosophy fell in popularity, only found in Sufi mystics. On the contrary, Greek medicine, science, and mathematics stuck around, helping with intellectual advancement, just like with Indian math, this time in geometry and algebra.
Nestorian Christians and Manichaeans settled in China, and Zoroastrians fled the Islamic conquerors of Islam. In Dunduhang, western China, a Buddhist community emerged. They built hundreds of cave temples and libraries of religious literatures, and they had scriptorias to produce Buddhist texts. Buddhists translated Dharma, which is the basic doctrine, to Tao, and Nirvana as a way to attract Chinese converts. Chan Buddhism focused more on intuition or the search for enlightenment rather than text. Monk Zhuangzong was one of the many pilgrims to visit India and the holy sites or homeland to learn more. Confucians despised the celibacy and alien superstitions and saw Buddhist monasteries as wasteful. In the 840s, Tang emperors ordered closure of monasteries and the expulsion of foreign religions. Zhu Xi is a Neo-Confucianism representative and was a prolific writer, keeping a deep commitment to Confucian values, personal behavior, and social harmony. He believed highest importance that individuals play proper roles in family and a larger role in society. Neo-Confucianism left a deep influence of Buddhism in Chinese society, and it helped shape philosophical, political, and moral thought for fallen states. In the Silla dynasty of Korea, Tang armies conquered Korea before the native Silla rallied to prevent Chinese domination. They stayed from conflict and later reached a compromise. Korea was tributary to China. They performed kowtow, and in return for their manners, they received valuable gifts. Embassies have sent Korean royal officials as tribute to recognize Chinese court and bureaucracy to organize their courts a similar way. The Silla kings built a new capital at Kumsong, modeling the Tang capital. Korean elites converted to Neo-Confucianism, while peasants turned to Chan Buddhism. Viets adopted Chinese agricultural methods, irrigation systems, schools, and administrative techniques. They went to tributary relations with the Chinese court until they tried to take the southern lands of Vietnam, causing revolts. The difference between Vietnam and China was that many Vietnamese retained their religious traditions. and women had a larger role in the Vietnamese society.
In 629, a man named Zhongzong left China to go to India to learn more about Buddhism. However, he faced many difficulties, such as his guide abandoning him in the Gobi Desert. Losing his water bag, Zhongzong made his way to the oasis town of Turpan, which had a Buddhist ruler who helped him. He crossed the world's highest mountain ranges, which include the Tian Shan, Hindu Kush, and Paran ranges. He would eventually make it to India in 630, where he would collect 657 Buddhist texts over 12 years. He would later transport it back to China. He would spend the rest of his life translating Buddhist texts. Yang Jian began his rise to power when a Turkish ruler appointed him Duke of Sui. The patriarch died, leaving a 7-year-old boy to rule, but Yang Jian forced his abdication. This would start the Sui dynasty, which would last from 589 through 618 CE. During this time, emperors ordered construction of palaces and higher military defense. The most elaborate project undertaken during the Sui dynasty was the Grand Canal, which was the world's largest waterwork project before modern times. The Grand Canal was a series of artificial waterways to reach the capital city. It extended 1,240 miles. It helped the economy by having new ways to get goods to northern China. In 1618, an assassin would kill the emperor, causing the dynasty to end.
There are two main problems hindering the Song dynasty from building a powerful state. One due to mistrust between leaders, and second due to emphasis on industry, education, civil administration, and other arts other than the military. The first Song dynasty emperor was Song Taizu, and Song Taizu started off as a junior military officer. He had the reputation of honesty and effectiveness, and he had about 960 troops, and eventually his troops would proclaim him as the emperor. The Song dynasty had a centralized imperialized government, and this would cause two problems. The first would be financial, as Song bureaucracy devoured China's surplus production, and the second would be military, as scholar bureaucrats had no military education. For the 10th and 12th century, a semi-nomadic group known as the Khitan would ask for money and tribute from the Song dynasty. Khitan were eventually captured by a nomad named Jurchen, and in the 10th century, he and his army would capture China, and specifically, he captured the capital Kaifeng, and later on he would turn it into the Jin Empire.
Agricultural development. A surge in agricultural development during the Tang and Song dynasties was the foundation of economic development for the two. Fast ripening rice from Vietnam and new agricultural techniques, such as utilizing beasts of burden for heavy plows, along with irrigation systems, helped expand China's agricultural potential. Because of this increased agricultural production, a massive population boom occurred as a result, from 45 million in 600 to 115 million by 1200. Another result was the urbanization of many Chinese cities, each of which with at least 100,000 residents. Popular poet of the Tang era, Li Bo took the social life of the Chinese as one of his main themes. The poet commented on the lighthearted and positive attitude towards life found at the time. Additionally, increased food production helped bring about a commercialized agricultural economy, partly due to food surpluses. Specialization of crops in different areas and exporting them to other areas gave rise to market-oriented cultivation. Alongside agricultural productivity, patriarchal social structures developed during the Tang and Song dynasties as well. Familial solidarity was strengthened with a diligent honoring of ancestral forefathers, while foot binding was an example of an increasing patriarchal authority. Foot binding involved tightly wrapping one's feet starting at a young age. A sign of wealth and a high social status, this practice often hindered a woman's ability to walk, requiring the aid of servants. This deliberately placed women more tightly under the control of the males and their respective families. The emergence of a market economy. Basically, the practice of selling fruits and cash crops, sometimes under the supervision of the Chinese government, resulted in a Chinese economy more tightly integrated than ever before. In order to compensate for the shortage of copper coins, letters of credit known as flying cash and checks later on were implemented as currency. The search for a new currency also proposed paper money, which caused many problems for society. Misrepresentation of actual cash reserves by paper money forced the Qing dynasty to impose stricter rules regarding money. Overall, paper money proved to be a powerful stimulus to the Chinese economy. With such a big economy, interactions with the Byzantine, Arabs, Persians, Indians, Malay, and more from all over with intentions of trade culminated into a cosmopolitan society. At the same time, the Chinese acquired a taste for exotic goods such as silk and porcelain.
The Tang and Song dynasties both generated remarkable technological innovations. Of these innovations, a lighter, thinner, more adaptable, and high-quality porcelain was likely the most prominent. This porcelain could also be aesthetically pleasing and could often serve as a work of art if fired with glazes. This porcelain didn't just stay in China either, as it diffused to the Abbasids, who also produced high amounts of it. Throughout these dynasties, the demand for Chinese porcelain specifically remained high, and they exported very high amounts of it, spreading throughout Asia, India, and Persia, eventually being known as Chinaware. Aside from porcelain, the Tang and Song also improved metallurgy, as they discovered that using coke instead of coal could produce far superior metal. These metals mostly went into the production of weaponry and tools for agriculture. For example, the Song produced 16.5 million arrowheads yearly. Iron and steel production was also used in construction projects such as bridges and pagodas. Gunpowder was also discovered during this time and was used mostly for warfare. For example, the militaries adopted it into fire lances and to develop early bombs. However, because the gunpowder wasn't nearly as advanced as today's, it was mainly used to distract or confuse their opponents in war. Printing also became very common during the Tang. Initially, they made use of block printing techniques until the development of printers in the 11th century, but because of the complex Chinese characters, printers couldn't be utilized as well as today. Nonetheless, the Tang still used printing to mass-produce important texts. Finally, the Chinese also extended naval technology. Developments came to be from Tang needs for overseas spices, and they soon equipped ships with iron nails, waterproofed oils, watertight bulkheads, and were able to be navigated with rudders and canvas and bamboo sails. One of the most important technologies was the south-pointing needle/compass, as it spread rapidly through the Indian Ocean as the Chinese ventured out.